The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. George was always a little weird. He was a small, pale, dishwater blonde, whose love of black vintage clothing made him look like a cross between a vampire and a funeral usher. He would talk, and sometimes sing, to himself in public. He spent most of his time reading, drawing fantasy creatures in his many sketchbooks, and taking long walks around town. But the weirdest thing about him was that he said he could talk to crows. We met in the 3rd grade. I was the new girl in town, sent from Boston to live with my grandparents while my parents slogged through their messy divorce. I first saw him at recess, a scrawny blonde boy dressed in black, sitting in an empty field, surrounded by crows. While the other kids hollered and laughed and ran around the playground, this kid was whispering to no one. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Talking to the crows," he said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I crossed my arms and glared at him. "You can't talk to crows?" He turned his head around to look at me. "Most people can't, but I can." "How do you do that?" The boy smiled, oblivious to my annoyance. "Crows are very smart. Scientists say they have their own language. They have jokes and different names for each other." I squinted at the half-dozen black birds milling around the boy. They didn't look that smart to me. I pointed at one. "What's that one saying?" "That's Percival. He's sulking because Diana," he gestured to another crow, "ate the caterpillar he wanted." Either this kid was playing an elaborate joke, or he was absolutely cuckoo. "And that one?" I asked. "That's Enoch. He's an elder." The boy cocked his head slightly. He had the palest blue eyes I'd ever seen, so pale they were almost white. "He's sizing you up, trying to see if you're a friend or a foe." Sure enough, Enoch was staring at me, his head cocked in a manner eerily similar to the boy's. I've rarely been able to discern the slightest emotion from a crow's beady black eyes, but in that moment I could see it. Curiosity, suspicion. "So what? He's like the leader of the flock." "Not flock, a murder." "What?" "A group of crows is called a murder." Whether he was cuckoo or not, this boy was proving to be the most interesting person in this boring little town. I sat down on the grass next to him. "My name's Maria," I said, and there I stayed. My parents were more interested in dragging out their divorce proceedings than coming back for their own kid, so my temporary stay with my grandparents became permanent. I never quite felt like I belonged anywhere. I never adjusted to leaving the city for a small town. I felt restless, like everything around me was slow and dull and hazy. I was a half-Mexican girl living in a mostly white town with my white grandparents. I was foreign enough to elicit stares from the locals, but too American to know how to speak Spanish. I was able to make a few friends, eventually, but George and I, always the odd kids out, became the closest. I learned pretty quickly that George spent most of his time alone. His parents were social climbers, eager to pretend their weirdo son didn't exist. Teachers didn't like him much. He was smart, but his grades were erratic, and he never fit in with the other kids. He was too cheerful for the goths, too quiet for the theater kids, too technologically inept for the geeks and nerds. Aside from me, his only companions were the crows. He knew every one of the dozens of crows that lived in our town, their names, origins, likes and dislikes. He gave them treats like peanuts and hard-boiled eggs. They left him gifts, usually shiny things like coins and bottle caps. When Enoch died, George, the other crows, and I held a funeral where George sobbed for hours. After that, the crows took to following him around whenever he went outdoors. Whenever he went indoors, the crows would gather round the windows, pecking and cawing to get his attention. "Why are they doing that?" my grandma asked nervously. George was over for dinner, and she noticed a few crows pecking at the dining room window. Crows can remember human faces, George said matter-of-factly. They remember humans who are friends to them and treat them like members of the group. Can they remember the humans who are jerks to them? My grandpa joked. Yes, they can. They'll tell the other crows about them and coordinate an attack. Grandpa started to laugh, but after seeing George's serious expression, he fell silent. Shortly after that, I noticed the crows following me around, not nearly as many as followed George, and not nearly as often, but there were sometimes a few trailing after me when I went outside. When I told George about it, his face split into a smile. "They know you're my friend," he said. "They consider you part of the murder now." It was a little unnerving, being tailed by little black birds everywhere I went, but I trusted George. If he thought being followed was a good thing, then he was probably right. There's only one event, from before things got so messed up, that stands out in my mind. It was right after I'd gotten my driver's license and inherited my grandma's ancient blue sedan. I was driving into town when I saw George. Now, it wasn't unusual to see him walking along local roads, but this time he was standing along the highway, in that thin stretch of grass between the forest and the asphalt, and he was staring at the ground. I pulled over and stepped out of my car to make sure he was okay. He didn't even look up. "Hi, Maria," he said blandly. "You're just in time for the feast." Before I could reply, I saw what he was looking at. It was a deer that had been hit by a car. It lay on its side in a pool of its own blood. Its abdomen was slashed open, and its guts spilled out onto the grass. And there were the crows, tearing out pieces of its flesh, sipping the congealing blood, slurping up its intestines. Worse still, the deer was still alive. What remained of its abdomen moved up and down in shallow, rapid breaths. Its eyes blinked rapidly. Its head moved groggily, snorting and whimpering as it lay there, being eaten alive. I stared and stared, wishing I could put the deer out of its misery, but too afraid to deal the killing blow. I realized George had been holding something. It was a baby crow with all white feathers. He was feeding it a piece of the deer's flesh, staining the crow's pink beak red. "This is Lux," he explained. "The other crows rejected her because of how she looks, so I'm taking care of her. And maybe one day I can integrate her into the murder." I nodded blankly, backed into my car, and drove away. It was the only truly freaky incident that occurred before the real nightmare. At the time, I put it out of my mind. Crows are scavengers, after all. It was just the circle of life. The trouble truly began when George started dating Kate. They were apparently introduced at some rich people function and hit it off right away. I seemed to be the only person who thought it was creepy that a 22-year-old was dating a high schooler. The average response to my concerns was, "He'll be 18 in a few months anyway." Beyond that, they had nothing in common. Kate's family, I'll call them the Oxfords, were old money New Englanders, the sort that brag about their ancestors coming over on the Mayflower. The Oxfords owned half the businesses in town, which meant we had to treat them like royalty. Kate wasn't outwardly mean, but she was shallow, bossy, and entitled. Not that George cared. He was head over heels, absolutely smitten. George had never had a girlfriend before. Now the prettiest, richest, most popular woman in town wanted him for herself. Everyone constantly talked about how lucky he was. "Kate's such an amazing catch. She'll straighten him out in no time. It'll be a fairy tale wedding. He won't have to work a day in his life." By graduation, George was spending almost all of his spare time with Kate. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised when I received their wedding invitation at the end of the summer. I didn't enjoy the wedding. It looked like it was curated for Kate's Pinterest account, and Kate made it pretty clear that she didn't want me there. But George seemed happy, and despite my misgivings, I came to support him. Although we had nice weather, Kate opted for an indoor wedding. I heard her tell a bridesmaid it was because those stupid birds won't leave us alone. I took a gap year, waiting tables at a local restaurant to raise money for college. After the wedding, I began to see George less and less. Every time I called him, he had a different reason for why he couldn't hang out. He wasn't feeling well. He and Kate were going on vacation. He was seeing his parents. He didn't go for walks anymore either. By winter, I mostly saw him whenever he stopped by the liquor store next to the restaurant. These liquor store runs were becoming alarmingly frequent. I found excuses to drive by his house. George and Kate had moved into one of the Oxford's many houses, a Victorian mansion at the very edge of town, about a mile away from the nearest neighbour. It was what rich people called rustic, and the rest of us called run-down. Its whitewash and green shutters were peeling. Its driveway, more gravel than pavement, seemed ill-suited for Kate's shiny new Lexus. The house was surrounded by thin strips of yard before giving way to the woods. But what struck me most of all was that every time I went there were dozens of crows surrounding the house. They flew onto the roof and pecked the dirt in the front yard. They knocked on the windows and perched in the surrounding trees. Sometimes their cawing was unbearably loud, but most of the time they were just silent, as if they were watching, waiting. I could only assume they were waiting for George. Occasionally I would see him staring out the window, with a glass of wine in his hand and a blank expression on his face. Despite his many friends waiting for him outside, and despite me waving to him from my car window, he would never come out. As winter gave way to a damp and chilly spring, I realized I had to do something. The next time I saw George at the liquor store, I ran out of the restaurant to see him. He didn't look good at all. His fair skin had a sickly, greyish tinge. He had lost weight, his figure barely visible under his baggy sweatshirt. His eyes had an empty, unfocused look, and his breath reeked of wine. He swayed slightly when he walked, and hardly seemed to notice the crows gathering around him. I'll admit I initially ambushed him with questions. Are you okay? Are you sick? Where have you been? He had trouble keeping up, only mumbling short replies. But when I asked him, why are you avoiding me? He went quiet and looked away. George? No answer. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I'm not allowed to have female friends, he blurted. Not allowed, I sputtered. Says who? Kate. It's not your fault, Maria. You've been great, but I've been a bad husband and Kate wanted to set boundaries. I just need some more time. She'll come around. This is all my fault. I couldn't believe this. So Kate was the problem. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, terribly, dangerously wrong. I have to go, he said. If she finds out I talk to you. Don't, I cried. George flinched, so I softened my tone. We have to talk more. When can I see you again? He thought for a moment. The park, 6 p.m. tomorrow, where no one can see us. Deal. Just be safe, George. Look out for yourself, please. George didn't reply, just stumbled down the street with his bottles of wine and a line of crows trailing behind him. The next evening I waited for George at a bench in the far corner of the park. The sun was setting rapidly, painting the two of us in blazing oranges and later velvety blues. George looked better. At least he was steady on his feet. He wore a huge pair of sunglasses in spite of the fading light. The crows gathered around us. I couldn't tell if they were listening in or keeping watch. The white crow found her way to the bench and snuggled into George's arms, where he gave her gentle head scratches. Lux is doing so well now, he said. The other crows just made her an elder. I'm so proud of her. I tried to make small talk. Had he read any books lately? Had he made any cool drawings? Found any new vintage clothes? No, and no. As the sun sank lower in the sky, I asked him why he kept his sunglasses on. He hesitated for a minute, then said, "Please don't freak out." He removed the sunglasses to reveal a massive bruise. It was stark against his pale skin, a sickly purple spreading across the left side of his face and around one reddened eye. "Jesus Christ, what happened to you?" "It's all my fault," he mumbled. "One of Kate's friends saw us together. Kate was crying and so upset. She didn't mean this. And she won't do it again, she promised." "Bullshit," I snapped. "Kate's got you trapped in that old mansion, and now she's hurting you. She'll find a reason to do it again no matter what." A line of tears was emerging from his bad eye and tracing a path down his mottled cheek. I don't know what to do." I took his cold hand in mine. "You have to leave, as soon as you can." He wasn't looking at me. He was looking out at the dozens of crows surrounding us. "I can't. She'll come after me. You don't know what sort of connections the Oxfords have. I'll help you. You just have to try." He sniffled. "She'll find me and kill me." "Please," I insisted. How could I make him see? I gestured outwards. Ask the crows, do they want you to leave Kate? George was silent for a few minutes. He was cocking his head, listening. I strained to follow their silent conversation, but I couldn't understand anything. The crows' black eyes were as cold and empty as ever. Lux looked up at George and croaked softly. Yes, George said, they say I should leave. I did everything I could to help George. I told my grandparents everything. They believed me, but were too scared of the Oxfords to help. I tried to tell George's parents, but they hung up on me mid-sentence. They saw George's marriage as their ticket to high society and wouldn't do anything to jeopardize it. I even called the local police. After I could get the deputy who answered to stop laughing and hand the phone over, the chief scolded me for spreading baseless rumors about a good girl from a good family. In the end, it was up to myself and George. Our plan was simple. We'd wait for when Kate was out of the house. George would throw a few clothes and some valuables in a backpack and sneak out through the back door. I would wait for him, parked about 300 feet away. I couldn't risk driving up to his house. George said the maid was instructed to phone Kate whenever my car drove past. Once George got into my car, we'd drive out of town to Boston or even further. One evening, Kate went out to have dinner with her parents. George stayed behind, claiming illness. I drove my crappy blue sedan to our agreed-upon spot and sat on the hood waiting for George to arrive. It was one of those evenings that was too cloudy for a proper sunset. Instead, the sky shifted from white to dark grey, and the shadows deepened. It was still early spring, and my sweatshirt did little to shield me from the wind. A handful of crows perched on my car, as if they were waiting for George too. My stomach was tying itself into knots. I found myself jumping at the rustling branches and scuttling animals. The woods loomed all around me, dark branches stretching miles high and creeping towards my tiny little car. It wasn't just the fear of being caught that was winding me up. I mean, what the hell was I doing? Here I was about to throw away everything I'd ever known. My grandparents, my job, college, to run off with some guy. But George wasn't just some guy. This was the guy with the sweet smile, who was kind to everyone he met, no matter how nasty they were in return, who refused to be frightened by death and decay, who loved mushrooms and bones the same way others loved songbirds and flowers. He could look at a deer in its death throes without flinching. He was the guy who could talk to crows. And to think about him now, sickly, bruised, drunk and alone, was enough to break my heart right in two. How was it that every time I saw him looking out the manor window, I failed to see the prison bars? He was dying of abuse and loneliness, and only I could save him. He was my best friend, perhaps my only true friend. He would have done the same for me. George arrived with his backpack and a murder of crows in tow. His skin was ghostly white. The yellow splotch of his fading bruise was very noticeable. He was practically shaking with nerves. "Are you okay, George?" "Terrified, but okay," he stammered. I tried to smile, but failed miserably. "So am I. Let's go." Before either of us could get into my car, we were interrupted by the sound of screeching tires. A shiny Lexus swerved towards us, barely missing my car and sending crows scattering. From the open window we could hear an enraged shriek. Kate had come home early. In the few seconds Kate stayed in the driver's seat, screaming obscenities at us, I came to a chilling realization. How it must have looked to jealous Kate, leaving home for a few hours only to find her unfaithful husband, backpack in hand, about to get into the car of his female friend. I almost felt sorry for her. My sympathy evaporated when her designer handbag came flying out the window. It struck George on the forehead, sending his small frame crumpling to the ground. Kate threw open the door and launched herself at George. She straddled him, pinning him to the ground as she rained blows on his face and arms. I could make out a few words. "Cheating bastard," "Mexican whore," "How could you do this to me?" mixed with George's sobs and wailed apologies. I threw myself at Kate, hoping to pull her off, and was met with an elbow to the face. I stumbled backwards, blood pouring out of my crushed nose. Kate was still beating George. His sobs were getting quieter and weaker, while her screams were unrelenting. Her face was unrecognizable, with a snarling open mouth and rolling eyes. Gone was the poised heiress with the polished car and fancy handbag. This was the true Kate, a wild animal, a howling demon, the monster who had kept George locked away. She would kill him, if not now, then later, after she had dragged him away. I wanted to do something, anything, but I lay frozen on the pavement. The blood from my nose was running down my throat, and the metallic taste gave me the powerful urge to vomit. Pain was pulsing through my face and spreading outwards with each heartbeat. Then I saw them, the crows, dozens, hundreds, more than I ever thought lived in this forest. They flew in a circle, their black bodies stark against the dark grey sky. Their caws grew louder and louder, and they were getting closer, spiraling towards the three of us, centering us in the eye of a tornado. A flash of white dashed into the center of the circle. Lux. She landed on Kate's shoulder and began pecking at her face. Kate tried to shake her off, but it didn't work. Lux's pecking turned to jabbing, which turned to stabbing. Kate stood up and tried to pull Lux off, but that only made things easier for Lux. She sank her pink beak into Kate's eye, impervious to her screams. The other crows soon descended on Kate, tearing the flesh away from her face, her neck, her hands. One crow ripped out chunks of her hair. Another tore out her fingernails one by one. Kate's screams became blood-curdling. "Help me, George! Help me!" But the cawing became even louder, so deafening I had to cover my ears. The crows drowned her out completely. Before long, I couldn't see Kate anymore, just a writhing mass of black birds. George had gotten to his feet. I could tell from his slack expression that this was beyond his control. His eyes were so pale and so wide, I could see the swirling circle of crows reflected in each of them. I grabbed his hand. "George!" He stood there motionless, mouth open, watching them. I pulled harder. "We have to go, now!" That shook him out of it. We didn't stop, not even to pick up George's bag. We ran to my car and slammed the doors shut. I floored the gas pedal, drove as fast as the old car would allow, didn't stop until we were well into town and the cars were too far away to hear. We pulled into a parking lot and sat in silence for a few minutes, trying to catch our breath. Then we called 911. I never got to see what was left of Kate after the crows were done with her. George and I spent the night in the hospital, and the Oxfords held a closed casket funeral. The most I learned came from overhearing my grandpa talking to his friend on the police force. According to him, the only way the police recognized Kate was from her driver's license. They found it in the designer handbag lying on the road beside her. The local paper reported Kate's death as a possible bear attack, but word got around. Everyone knew it was George's crows. After George was released from the hospital, he spent the night with me and my grandparents. Neither of us could sleep, so we stayed up late talking. Around midnight, Lux started pecking at the window, holding a gift in her mouth. I should have been more freaked out about seeing a crow again, but I somehow knew that neither she nor any other crow would hurt me. George opened the window and greeted Lux with a smile. Her white feathers were still reddish-brown, from blood hadn't quite washed off. In her mouth was a human finger. It was missing a fingernail, but it wore a very familiar wedding ring. George thanked Lux and slipped the finger into his pocket. When he turned to me, his pale blue eyes had regained some of their past brightness, his smile warmer despite his bruised face. Perhaps he took the gift as a sign of the crow's true devotion, or perhaps he could finally believe that Kate was truly dead. Either way, I was glad to have him back. I never asked George what he did with the gift. I cared about him a lot, but there were some things I didn't and still don't want to know. That was over a year ago. George and I are both going to college in Boston. I live in an apartment near campus, but George chooses to commute. The people in town still avoid him, but for different reasons. People cross the street if they see him coming. Waiters frantically apologize for the slightest mistakes. If a little kid tries to approach him, a parent will quickly pull them away. Maybe it's not him they're scared of, but the crows. They still follow him everywhere. Whenever I visit town, they follow me too. I don't mind. Oddly enough, I feel safer with them around. Sometimes I ask George why he doesn't move away. Escape the Oxfords who shun him, the close-minded neighbors who fear him. Start over somewhere new, but he always refuses. He doesn't want to leave the crows behind. We arrived at the hospital around 7:30 at night. Me, Jax, and my partners Ryan, a big quiet man, and Sydney, probably the most beautiful women I've ever met, get out of the all-black van, with the only noticeable marking being a logo with 3 arrows pointing towards themselves. The hospital itself had shut down around 30 years prior because of what was assumed to be an outbreak of some illness that was never identified, killing over half the patients in a night. It was only 1 floor, but still decently sized for the era it was made in. What used to most likely be a nice building was now moss-covered and mostly boarded up, located in the north part of Florida. "We've arrived on site," I say into my radio, as we start strapping on our plate carriers with 3 extra magazines for our AR-15s and clipping on our side, holsters for our Glock 19s, and lastly our helmets only rated to stop small calibers, but strong enough to take blunt force if necessary, and of course NVGs with it being abandoned and all. 10 to 4 Jacks, we're not too sure what class this is, so proceed with caution. "Great," Sydney says, knowing the potential danger since we have almost no information other than that recently some explorers had went missing. "You'll know the drill. Search and rescue if they're alive. But our main objective is exterminating the anomaly," I say to my team. Ryan just nods his head, never being much of a talker, but most big guys aren't, and he was at least 6 feet 5 inches. Walking into the building, I say something into my radio along the lines of "We're entering the building." Flipping on the NVGs, the tall, dark hallway lights up green as we start to enter. There's a front desk with a long hallway behind it that looked to separate into 6 other small halls for the patient rooms and a kitchen on the far left side. Ignoring the kitchen, we start heading down the long hallway, planning to start from the back of the hospital and make our way up to the front. As we step over broken glass and push empty beds out our way, we head to the end of the hall, planning to start on the side hall to the right, since the other seemed to be mostly empty, with only what looks like the remains of the rehab part of the hospital. Heading down the hall, we stop at room 1 and see nothing inside or out. Pulling out my scanner to check the anomaly rating to see nothing's going off, which repeats for every room till we reach room 6, the last door on the right. Before opening the door, the device starts beeping like crazy, silencing it. We all turn to each other and prepare to breach and enter the room, me taking point. I slowly open the door, stepping into a room that looks like it was never abandoned. We did a double take and yep, a completely normal-looking hospital room. Stepping in, we see nothing till we see a bathroom door which we prepare to breach, as I hear something moving around in there. "I'll take point," I whisper, nodding to Sydney and Ryan, kicking the door open. I see what looks to be a 1980s era looking nurse cleaning the bathroom. Hello," I say to the lady who hasn't even turned around to acknowledge our presence. "Hello," I say louder, reaching to grab their shoulder and spin them around. But when I do, what turns around was almost normal, except the face. The hair, nails, body, everything about her, or it was normal, at least for the time period we assume it's from, but the face. It had wide black eyes with a single white dot that I assume was its pupil, a mouth that hung open like something from the Evil Dead, and ears that leaked black goo and a skull-like nose. It screeched an unholy sound as I stepped back, readying my rifle before it shoots. I guess shockwaves, from its mouth sending me flying out the door, slamming into the wall on the other side of the room. Sydney and Ryan step forward, raising their weapons before Sydney's flies back, barely missing me, but not missing the wall. And Ryan's gun gets knocked out his hand as he reaches for his pistol. It grabs him, screaming into his ear as he tries to fight its grasp, but in a second he drops. Thinking quick, I grab Sydney and run out the room. "So physical isn't an option. He overpowered Ryan in a second," Sydney says, as we run towards the middle of the long hall, looking for a spot to set up. "Yay, we need to keep distance," I say as we flip a bed in the hall and hunker down, waiting for the creature to walk into sight. "My NVG's broke," Sydney says, frustrated. "Switch to flashlights," I say, flipping up the NVGs and clicking the button on the side of my rifle. The now lit hallway shows nothing but emptiness when we hear in a sing-songy voice, "What can Ms. Mary help you with?" in a low, scraggly voice which repeats over and over as we ready ourselves. We see it enter the hallway as we take aim and light the bastard up. It drops for about 10 seconds before slowly picking itself up, repeating, "What can Ms. Mary help you with?" Rushing down the hall, we switch mags as it runs towards us faster than any animal alive could. Jumping to the side, we see it rush past us and stops. We flick off our lights, hoping it would conceal us as we slowly slide our back to the corner of the hall behind it. When I drop the old spent mag I had previously just used, when we see the creature not even flinch at the noise. Noticing, I lean down slowly and pick the mag up and proceeded to throw it down the opposite direction and see the creature still hasn't moved. "I don't think it can hear us," I whisper to Sydney as we now are speed walking backwards down the hall, when the creature starts to turn and look around, presumably searching for us. Slipping into a room, we shut the door. "How are we getting out of this one?" Sydney says, looking at the barred windows. "I have no clue," I say, stepping towards the back wall. "One of us can try to distract it while the other lines up a shot," I say, looking into her eyes, wondering if after today I'll ever be able to express how I feel about her. "Look, I know it's dumb to think about this right now, especially with everything going on and it being against protocol, but how about a date if we make it out of this?" I say cautiously. "Sure, but you know that means we gotta kill this bitch," she says, smiling. "Okay," I say with newfound confidence. "I'll go distract it. You line up the shot," I say as I rush out the door, spraying shots at the creature down the opposite hall. Running towards the creature, it stretches its mouth wider and sprints towards me, screeching, "What can Miss Mary help you with?" Right before we collide in the middle of the hall, I turn left, shooting behind me as it chases me. I hear Sydney's feet running down the hall I just came from, diving to the ground. In front of me, I turn and spray the last of my mag into the creature's chest as Sydney runs up behind it, stuffing the barrel to the back of its head, and empties the gun. The creature drops as we start reloading our weapons. I pull out my pistol and put a few extra in just in case. We radio over Ryan's Kaya, but we got the creature proceeding towards the entrance to await the cleanup crew. Walking away, we hear a faint, What can Ms. Mary help you with?" Spinning around, the creature had already picked itself up and grabbed Sydney by the head, lifting her up. Charging the creature, I scream, "Put her down!" I try to tackle the beast before being knocked away like I weigh less than a feather and slamming the side of my body so hard into the wall it cracks and breaks my arm, yelling in pain. I look to see the creature slowly rip Sydney's head clean off as she screams and then silence. Sobbing, I lift myself up, clinching my arm. I sprint down the hall, only looking back for a second, but I wish I didn't. It was eating her. I turned the corner and slammed my good arm into the door, busting out as soon as backup arrived. But I don't know how they fared against the creature. I passed out only after. I awoke to find myself back at home base, and that's everything I remember, Doc. "Well, Jax, it seems you were very lucky. We'll ignore your breach of protocol given the fact you watched her die in front of you. But next time, don't get so attached, Sard." "Yes, sir," I said softly, clicking off the recorder in my pocket. "At least everyone can know your sacrifice, Sydney," I whisper to myself before walking out. The sun was slowly sinking behind the tree line in the distance, disappearing behind the horizon and covering the forest in a dark blanket. I had parked my car on the small concrete slab next to the area's informational sign, which read Spoonersville National Park. Now I was hiking across the small heath separating me from the dark, tall pines. After about half an hour of walking, I found a clearing that looked spacious enough for a tent and a fire pit. By the time the last of the sun's rays had disappeared from the woods, I was sitting by the fire in front of my tent. The wind was slowly blowing through the dark, tall trees around me. It almost sounded like the whole forest was whispering, yet somehow I did not find it spooky but weirdly calming. I had been a part of the Boy Scouts for most of my childhood, which introduced me to the likes of sleeping in tents, gathering wood and cooking on open fire. Once I was 18 years of age, there were no more groups for me to join, so I had been offered to become one of the troop leaders, passing my knowledge on to the new generations and all that. But college life had me too busy, so I had to decline. I did miss being out in nature, though, and that's why I decided to make it a little tradition to go out on trips like the one I was on now every year. It wasn't a cold night per se, but the fire kept the chilly air away, so I stood up and grabbed my flashlight to go find some more wood for my fire. It only took me a minute to find a nice, small pine log. I let my hand run over the exposed core of the log to check if it was dry, but the second I reached down, I heard something fly right over my back and hit a tree behind me. I shot back up and looked behind me. Now I was no stranger to bats or owls, but them flying this close. Had I set up near a nesting ground? Surely not, since a bird would have surely hooted, screeched, or cawed me away long before I would have gotten even close to its eggs. Scanning the forest behind me only revealed a really big brown shoe with a hole in the bottom. It must have been at least size 18.5, stuck to one of the trees. It was probably left there by another camper to mark something, although I hadn't noticed it when I was putting my tent up. With no sign of the flying assailant, I grabbed a couple more small logs and branches to pile up on the orange autumn needles on the forest floor. Although these trips usually took place in the summer, I had been working extensively this year to save up for a car, so I could finally travel longer distances without relying on public transport. This did mean, however, that I had to move my trip to a random weekend, somewhere in October. This didn't really bother me, since apart from the shorter days and rainier weather, the temperature was pretty similar. After I got tired of staring at the dancing flames turning into still embers, it was time to kick some sand on the charred logs and to crawl into my sleeping bag. I was well on my way to some sweet dreams when I was awakened by the beeping of my watch. Beep, 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 beep. October 13th, it read. Hallows Eve. Stupid default alarms. I pressed mute and rolled over again. I'll have to update it and turn those holiday notifications off when I get back home. Maybe 2 or 3 hours later, I was rudely awoken by another alarm. I checked my watch, but its screen was grey and dull. I listened closely and heard it again. It wasn't a beeping alarm, but more of a giggle. No, a cry or a call. It sounded like a sob, but animalistic. Yuck. Yes, that seemed the closed, like the sound someone makes in an old cartoon when they see Brussels sprouts or cabbage. Yuck, yuck, yuck. 3 cries, and the forest went silent again. Even though it was sad, it gave me chills. Was it a stray wolf, a coyote even? Did they even live this far north? After a couple minutes, that seemed like an eternity, the cries seemed to stop. I crawled over to the zipper of my tent, slowly peered through the teeth, and pointed my flashlight outward. Slowly I scanned the trees around me, in the direction the sound seemed to come from, except for a few birds, there were no signs of life anywhere, until I looked beneath me. There, on the orange needles, a small weathered toy laid next to my tent. It seemed to resemble a mouse, I think. It was a soft, fabric-covered black ball with 2 round discs resembling ears. On the bottom, a black flexible tube had been attached, connected to a small yellow shoe. This definitely had not been here before. Did it fall from a tree? Did the wind blow it here? Did someone from college follow me to play a prank on me? Picking the toy up and turning it around revealed a small wind-up gear, with a badly scribbled note that read, "Twist me," stitched above it. I half expected the thing to just play an hour loop of "Never Gonna Give You Up," or that annoying bird laughing, but when I released the gear I couldn't place the tune at first. It took me a couple of seconds, but when I heard an extremely distorted "hot dog," I realized what it was. It was one thing for someone to go out of their way to secretly follow me and drop a weird recording toy in front of my tent, but to add a distorted version of the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse theme, even that went too far for my friends. Although maybe Tom would go far enough, but he would be competing in his rowboating tournament halfway across the world by now. Did he make that up? No. And besides, the distorted audio loop didn't sound faked. It genuinely sounded like it was once a vibrant and happy tune that had been played and worn over time to the point where it had gotten creepy. Much more time to ponder on the hows and whys was not given to me, for as soon as the crooked music box stopped playing, I heard something scurrying behind my tent, followed by a "Hayuk, Hayuk." It didn't take me a second to decide what to do. My fight or flight response kicked in, and I chose flight. Quite literally, as I nearly flew through the trees. I must have sprinted the full 30-minute walk to the heath in 5 minutes max. Usually I would get winded after a minute or two, but I had only one thought on my mind: run. Once I was out of the woods, I shined my flashlight behind me and glanced over my shoulder. There was no sign of whatever was making that noise yet, but I could feel something behind me in the forest. I practically jumped to my car when I reached the concrete. I looked around. Nothing. I breathed a sigh of relief and reached into my pocket. At that moment, my head showed me attaching my car keys to a ring on my backpack, which I had left in the tent before crossing the heath. My hand, of course, grabbed nothing as my keys weren't there. I took some deep breaths, manned up and made myself big. As long as I shine my flashlight in its eyes, appear big, scary, and don't get too close. An animal should keep its distance. I took a couple of paces out from my car, back onto the heath, all the while talking myself up. It's just an animal. I'll get my keys and sleep in the car. I just overreacted. It probably found the toy somewhere and decided to carry it around and simple dropped it when sniffing around my campsite. Yeah, it's probably just a dog who got left and that toy is its only plaything. But when I turned around halfway across the heath to look at my car, I saw no dog. The heath wasn't a long stretch of land, maybe about half a football field. At least enough as to be able to see what was standing on top of my old car, illuminated by the moonlight. I stopped breathing. A tall man stood on the roof of my car. His head was painted black, but his face had a weird light beige color, making it look like a flat snout. His ears were elongated and thin, like that of a dingo. His chest was fully painted orange, and he only wore a filthy black, open sleeveless jacket. He wore short jeans and had his lower legs painted in a similar blue. Beneath it were huge brown size 18 shoes, which his black toes stuck through the noses of. I wanted to freeze, to close my eyes and forget this monstrosity, but I was much more afraid of its intentions than of its looks, and so I spun myself around, running back towards the forest. And before I entered, I glanced over my shoulder, needing to know that thing was chasing me. It was, with big, freakish passes. Was it quickly closing the distance between us? I swung my head back in the direction I was going and... too late. I had realized too late that there was a tree in front of me, and so a second after looking in front of me, I collided with it and even the moon went dark. When I came to my senses, every bone in my body ached and my skin itched, like I was wearing a terrible grandmother's sweater all over. But I would have taken an itchy sweater over this any day, because I was wearing some sort of pale, decrepit yellow suit. It was a completely yellow sweater, pants and 2 pairs of socks, one on my feet and one on my hands. They were all stitched together and incredibly tight. Around my neck there was a thick metal collar, which in turn was chained to a tree nearby. So escape was no option. I looked around me. Between the trees, a giant fabric roof had been fashioned from at last 20 or so sewn together tents. On the edge I could see what had, until recently, been my tent. There was a fire going beneath the middle of the tents, where a hole had been cut for the smoke. On it was a big kettle with steam rising out of it. In the corner there lay a pile of backpacks. Were these from other people? Where are they? Before I could walk around a bit more, I heard hayuk hayuk getting louder and louder. The thing was even scarier in the daylight. It had a large black hole for a nose and 2 demonic, purely black eyes. Its mouth looked like it had been pulled outward and contained only 2 stained yellowed teeth. Its earlobes had clearly been pulled out into long, thin strips, and its clothes seemed even more foul than before. They had dark brown and red stains on them. The next few days of my life were a living hell. The thing would feed me the stew in the cauldron, putting a small wooden bowl of it within the reach of my chain. The broth was dark and thick. It never seemed to sleep, and rarely stalked around its camp. When it did, it was only to feed me, or to hide behind trees and watch me. At night, it would force me to play the distorted tune from the toy. The melody haunted my dreams, and the monster my waking moments. But whenever my tormentor wasn't mentally scarring me, I checked around the camp. I could see into the big cauldron, and the amount of mystery soup in it seemed to slowly decrease by the day. He never touched the bags, but I could in no way reach them. 6 days. After 6 days, I found some hope. The thing had left a tent pin in one of the roof pieces. Whenever I could, I threw pine cones up. Some would hit. Most would miss. It took a couple hits, but eventually the thin metal pin came down. I pondered what to do with it. Stab the thing? Pry open my chains? I grabbed the pointy end and started breaking away the fibers of the tree my chain was attached to. The tree was pretty thick, and the haunting presence of the beast made it no easier. I covered my progress with bark and hid the tool in the forest ground. Slowly but surely was I getting through the tree. I knew once I were to reach halfway through the trunk, I might be able to punch it over. Then I'd only have to cut through whatever tendons of fiber were left holding the tree together. For 3 more days I had to carefully chip away the tree, splinters at a time, making sure the tree was getting as weak as possible without it falling over. I woke up on a misty morning. The sun still hung low on the horizon, and the woods were slowly awakening. There was no sign of it. This was my moment. I pushed the tree over and quickly tried softening its fall on the other side. When it hit the ground with a thud, I took a minute to listen. Surely it wouldn't come investigate a falling tree. When the forest remained quiet, I rushed over to the backpacks. They were all nearly empty, apart from a pocket knife, a compass, and a plastic bottle. I took them and rushed over to the cauldron to have at least some hydration with me. But as I got close to the fire pit for the first time, I dropped my yaw in horror. There were no stones surrounding the burnt wood. What I thought had been round stones was actually a perfectly arranged circle of human skulls. I slowly approached the cauldron and saw it was nearly empty. Nearly. Lining the bottom of the iron pot, there were a ridiculous amount of small, broken and splintered human bones. I knew for sure because some finger bones still had rings on them. I had found the owners of all those tents. There was not a single bone in my own body that didn't want to drop to the floor and start weeping. But I couldn't. I had to get out. Now. The plastic bottle fell to the floor as I bolted away into the trees. I had to get at least as far away as possible. After 5 minutes, I started walking at a slower pace. Safety was who knows how far away, and I still had to make it there. I tried to stick to heading south, as most big cities close to my original camping ground were in that direction. I figured the beast wouldn't have taken me far, or hoped at least. Right before the night befell the forest, I felt tears in my eyes. There were lights in the distance. Not fire nor stars, no. Electrical lights, homes, a town, safety. I closed in on the buildings and knocked on the first door I saw a light behind. A kind, elderly lady let me in and helped me call emergency services. And now, after many months of therapy sessions, mental help and meds, I've finally been able to sleep again. My therapist told me I should try to tell my story to a broader audience, that it would help show that the delusions from being alone in the wild for so long were no more than that. It would help me realizing that I simply had a breakdown on a camping trip and ran off into the woods. For now, I will need to get my life back together. I had lost my collage apartment and my belongings had been thrown out due to my absence. The police could find no evidence of a place called Spoonersville National Park. It seemed to have disappeared along with my car. So now I live in a small home for the mental help, but they are going to help me get a place somewhere soon, they said. Someone brought me a gift last night, a sturdy black ball with 2 soft mouse ears and a tail with a boot on it. It play a cheery tune when you twist a gear on the back of it. I think I will go shopping tomorrow. Maybe I'll get one of those warm, black sleeveless jackets. Yuck! I used to be a trucker, was for about 10 years I think. I don't do driving anymore. Try to limit as much as I can, even outside of work. Now, I don't have a fear of driving. I have a fear of destinations. Every time you get into a car, you have a destination in mind, a place you want to go. Even if you don't have a specific place in mind, that place is just a way. The saying, it's about the journey, not the destination. Bullshit. When is the car ride to your vacation spot the fun part of the trip? Never. Usually just awkwardly quiet. That's besides the point, though. What I hate the most, though, is driving through the Midwest. I swear, every single one of those towns is just the same. Identical. Cookie cutter. Gas station. Few neighborhoods. Corner store. Once you've seen one, you've seen them all. It's midsummer. I've been going through miles and miles of just cornfields as far as the eye can see. Flat fields of corn, oddly beautiful during the day, like a sea of green spreading out there. During the night, though, you can only imagine what might be hiding in those corn stalks. As a trucker, you have to remain vigilant. If something, or for some godforsaken reason, someone were to dart out, I wouldn't be able to stop. Just don't like the fields at night. I'm on Route 23, somewhere between Iowa and Nebraska, and it's getting dark. When it gets dark in the Midwest, all you have is the lights on your truck and the light of the moon. Here's something you might not know. The majority of large truck crashes happen in rural areas. I personally have had some of my closest calls in rural areas. Just nothing for miles, not even a turn in the road, and your brain basically just starts to turn off, go on autopilot. Never a good thing when your mind starts to wander while operating a 30-ton killing machine. So when I start to get tired, I start to look for a place to rest for the night. That's what I was doing when I stumbled across exit 202. I had driven down this route a good few times before, but this exit was new to me. I just figured there might have been some new development since the last time I had been down the route. I was curious, tired, and hungry, so I took the exit and headed down the road. Corn. That's all I can say. Corn. This road was narrow, a struggle to stay in my lane as the highway ended and gave way to a mostly neglected road, unkempt and rough. Looking into the distance, there was nothing. No lights, no buildings, not even another car on the road. Just corn. So much corn. Then that's when I saw it. A small clearing on the side of the road, with a large neon pink sign beckoning me closer. Mabel's Diner. Getting closer, it looked like it was on its last legs. The light was dim, flickering in the night. From what I could see from the safety of my truck, the diner looked rusted and near decrepit. Although an open sign and lights within, with nowhere else to go, I hopped out of my truck and entered the building. As I entered, a weak-sounding bell heralded my entry. The place was nearly empty, with a few patrons who barely even looked up from their plates as I walked in. The waitress behind the counter looked at me with a dull gaze. This poor woman seemed exhausted, as if she had been working here as long as the building had been. Her name tag was only more proof of this, reading Mabel. I just asked for the house special, and she served me some pretty basic eggs and sausage with a tired smile. My nose began to sniffle. I've always had allergies. Something about this place, though, was especially bad, like stuck in a hayloft bad. My nose just would not stop leaking, my eyes were starting to water, and I was severely starting to regret not taking my allergy medicine earlier. As I ate, my mind began to wander. The food was just forgettable. It was sustaining but utterly unfulfilling. Makes sense why the place looked so worn down. Who would come all the way out here for this? That's when a big feeling of unease began to creep into my chest. The place was silent. Not a single noise. There is always noise no matter where you go. Scraping of utensils on plates, quiet murmuring. Hell, even the humming of lights or even a fly buzzing past. The place was just utterly silent. I quickly paid for my meal, throwing down a wad of cash as I left, leaving all of the disheveled patrons behind me. I walked out into that pitch-black parking lot and came to a terrible realization. The parking lot was empty. Not a single vehicle was out there, including my truck. It was gone. I was stranded in this horrible place. I pulled out my phone, tried calling my boss, and of course, because I'm in the middle of nowhere, no signal and no escape. I heard a faint jingle of a bell opening and a cold voice cutting through my chest. "Mabel," she said to me. "Oh dear, your truck gone. Come on in, stay a while. We'll call someone for you." She stood so still in the doorframe, a silhouette dimly lit by the dingy light behind her. When people stand still, they still move. Their chest rises and falls as they breathe, maybe a drum of their fingers against their leg, a small shifting back and forth in their stance, but she was deathly still, like a mannequin. It wasn't just that, but her voice just sounded wrong, flat, hollow. I was filled with a sense of dread, like if I followed along with her, I would not be leaving that diner. So I slowly turned around and began walking back the way I came. Maybe if I made it back to the highway, I could hail someone down and get to a place to fill in my boss and figure out what to do about my truck. And I walked, and I walked, and I walked, and I walked. The corn all around me, so utterly alone. It was dark. No lights, no nothing. Just the rustling of corn and the moonlight to guide me. Then I heard that piercing voice again. "Stay a while. We'll keep you company." I spun around, and there she stood, standing in the road, deathly still. "Stay a while." Meh. The corn to my sides shifted as some of the patrons of the bar slowly made their way out. Now, looking closer, I came to a terrible realization. The reason they were silent, the reason they didn't even seem to breathe. In the glimmer of the moonlight, as they approached me, I saw what they really were. Their skin was stretched tight, more of a mask than their own flesh. Peeking from underneath the seams of their skin, around their neck, was straw, poking out from between the stitches that held them together. They grabbed me, holding on to me with a strength I had never felt before. Mabel just got closer and closer to me. I trashed against their grip, screaming and crying against the men who were holding me back. Mabel only got closer, her cold, dead eyes staring into me. "Stay a while." Her hand stretched out, touching my neck, an icy stillness spreading through my body. Adrenaline is one hell of a drug. I kicked her right in the stomach with all of my strength. It was like kicking a brick wall. She stumbled back, looking more confused than shocked. The men's grip on me loosened just barely enough, and I broke loose, running as fast as I could for the highway. My heart pounding, adrenaline coursing through, letting me push past the ache and pain of my joints and my ragged gasping for air. I kept running and running past the burn of my lungs and the tightness of my throat. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw headlights in the distance. I waved my arms, screaming until my voice gave out, and he stopped for me. I explained my situation, that someone was trying to kill me. He let me into his car and started driving to a nearby town, toward the diner. I began to panic, to tell him to turn around to the highway, that the people who attacked me were this way. And he looked at me confused, that the highway was nowhere nearby, that there was no Mabel's diner, that there was no exit 202. A feeling of pure fear flooded me. We drove for a while, and as I saw the lights of the town in the distance, the man was right. There were no signs of my assailants. There were no signs of the diner, no signs of my truck. The cornfields ended, and I was greeted by a small Midwestern town. The man dropped me off at the local police station, and I gave them my statement. I called my boss about the situation, and they sent someone in the area to swing by and bring me back home. When I got back and tried reporting my truck and all its details, they gave me the most confusing revelation yet. My truck was still in the garage. Only when I went to check on it, it wasn't the same truck. Different license plate, the color was a different shade, and the keys in my pocket did not work on this one. I brought it up to my supervisor, and he looked just as confused as I did. The keys didn't go to any truck in the garage, or any on the record ever. I still have the keys now, not sure what to do with them. I quit pretty soon after, not a big fan of leaving my town, much less the state, especially those cornfields. God, I hate those cornfields. I'm just trying to separate from it all. I'm worried that this might be a curse for me, because on the highway to get my groceries today, I saw an exit 143. And despite all the information I look for it online, there is no exit 143. I never should have bought it. That bag, its texture, its warmth, something about it felt so wrong from the moment I touched it, but I was too mesmerized by its strange beauty. I found it in an old antique shop, hidden behind dusty shelves. The shopkeeper barely glanced at me as I picked it up, murmuring something about how it had been there for years, untouched. I should have left it there, in the darkness where it belonged. But I didn't, and now I'm paying the price. It started small, little things. At first I thought I was imagining it. You know, those small, creepy feelings you get when you're alone. Like the air shifts, or the shadows bend just a little bit differently. Yeah, like that. But it didn't stay small for long. After the first night, I began hearing faint whispers. They were soft, barely noticeable, like someone calling my name from another room. I'd searched the house, but it was always empty. The bag was always where I'd left it, sitting quietly in the corner like a patient predator. On the third night, I had my first nightmare. I dreamt of a girl, her skin peeled away, her face contorted in pain and rage. She stood at the foot of my bed, her eyes hollow, her lips whispering things I couldn't understand. I woke up in a cold sweat, and there, sitting next to me on the bed, was the bag. I hadn't put it there. It had moved, on its own. I was too scared to touch it, too scared to throw it away. I couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder every night, creeping into my thoughts, turning every dark corner of my mind into a nightmare. My house, it changed too. The windows would fog up without reason. The mirrors would crack when I wasn't looking, and every time I checked my reflection, I swear I saw her, the girl from my dreams. Aisha, I later learned her name was. The name came to me in a whisper, like the wind spoke it. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, I needed help. Desperation led me to a shaman, an old woman who lived on the outskirts of town. I didn't believe in such things before, but I couldn't deny what was happening. Something unnatural had latched itself onto me, and that bag was at the center of it all. The moment the shaman laid eyes on the bag, her face twisted in horror. Her hands trembled as she reached out to touch it, pulling back at the last second. "You have no idea what you've brought into your home," she whispered, her voice thin with fear. I tried to explain everything, the whispers, the dreams, the moving bag, but she stopped me, shaking her head. "This bag, it's not just cursed, it's evil. It was made from the skin of a girl named Aisha, killed by her best friend out of jealousy. The friend, Samantha, believed she could steal Aisha's beauty by wearing her skin, but the act twisted her soul. What she didn't realize was that Aisha's spirit was bound to it, and her vengeance consumes anyone who possesses it." My throat went dry. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Vengeance?" I stammered. The shaman nodded, her eyes wide and filled with a terror I had never seen before. "Samantha's entire household was slaughtered by the bag. It's cursed, feeding on the lives of those who own it. Aisha's rage will not stop until she's taken back what was stolen." I tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy. "What do I do? Can't you help me?" The old woman's face darkened. "There's no undoing what's been done. You must destroy it." "How?" She shook her head, already looking defeated. "You can't. People have tried. Fire, water, even burying it deep in the earth. It always comes back. The only thing you can do is run as far as you can, but even then, I'm not sure you can outrun her." I left her home in a panic, clutching the bag in my hands, unsure of what to do. The streets seemed darker as I walked, every shadow seeming to stretch towards me. I could feel it. Aisha was close. She was watching. That night, I tried to leave the bag outside, thinking maybe I could abandon it. But the moment I stepped back into the house, it was there, sitting in the middle of the room, waiting. The whispers were louder than ever, now calling my name over and over again. I don't know what to do. Every time I close my eyes, I see her, Aisha, her skinless body, her hollow eyes filled with hate. The bag seems to move closer on its own, inching toward me, always a little closer when I'm not looking. I can feel it tightening around my mind, like a noose I can't escape. The shaman was right. There's no escaping this. The bag will take me, just like it took Samantha and everyone else. I just hope someone reads this before it's too late. If you ever find an old leather bag in a forgotten shop, no matter how beautiful it seems, don't touch it, don't buy it, don't take it home. It will find you. And when it does, there will be no escaping its curse. I was pacing around my bedroom that night, restless and unable to sleep. Every creak in the old house made me glance over my shoulder, and every shadow seemed to stretch a little longer than usual. Maybe it was just nerves. Maybe it was just another one of those nights where your imagination runs wild and everything feels wrong. I couldn't shake the unease gnawing at me, so I kept moving, until a scream tore through the silence. It was sharp and desperate, a sound that made my skin prickle and my blood run cold. I froze, straining to hear, my heart hammering against my chest. Was it my imagination? A figment of my anxiety playing tricks on me? Then I heard it again, a raw, agonizing scream, followed by the unmistakable sounds of someone struggling. Something inside me tightened. My feet felt like they were stuck in quicksand, but somehow I made my way to the window, every step heavy with dread. What I saw made my stomach lurch. There, in the dim glow of a street lamp, my neighbor was thrashing on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. A man stood over him, his face hidden in shadow, but I could see the glint of steel in his hand as he drove it down again and again. My neighbor's voice broke with each stab, his shouts growing weaker, fading into pitiful whimpers. And the man, he was smiling, lips curled back in a grotesque grin. He was enjoying it. Every single second. I wanted to scream, to shout, to do something, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear, watching in helpless horror as my neighbor's life was taken from him in a brutal, bloody act of violence. I tried to look away, but it was like my eyes were glued to the scene, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When it was over, the silence was worse. My neighbor lay lifeless, a crumpled heap on the ground, his blood staining the pavement like spilled ink. The killer straightened up, wiped his blade clean on the body's clothes, and turned. My heart stopped as his gaze drifted up, locking onto my window. Our eyes met. For a second, it felt like time itself froze. A shiver of pure, primal terror shot through me as the killer's lips stretched into a slow, deliberate smile. He lifted his weapon, pointing it directly at me like a promise. My breath caught. "You're next." That was all I needed to snap out of my trance. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I dialed 911, pressed call, and nothing. No network. I glanced at the screen in disbelief, and my heart sank. What the hell? Then, just as I was trying again, the lights flickered once, twice, and died, plunging the house into pitch darkness. My breath hitched, the darkness suddenly feeling thick and suffocating. I knew it wasn't just a power outage. I was being isolated, cut off from help. Panicked, I ran to the kitchen and yanked open the drawers, my fingers scrambling for anything I could use to defend myself. I found a knife, small but sharp, my only lifeline. Clutching it tightly, I made another desperate attempt to call the police. Still no network. I swallowed hard, the cold blade trembling in my grip. My mind was racing. What should I do? I ran outside, shouting for help. My voice echoed down the empty street, a pathetic cry swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Somebody, please, help!" There was no answer, no lights flicking on in the neighboring houses. No one came out. No one heard me. Or maybe no one wanted to hear me. And then I saw him, standing at the edge of my yard, his silhouette sharp and menacing against the darkness. My breath hitched. He took a step forward, and I stumbled back, raising my knife. I don't want any trouble," I stammered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I've got a knife too." But the words were weak, my voice a pitiful whisper in the face of his calm, confident menace. The killer's grin widened, and he lunged. Fear shot through me, and I turned and ran, sprinting around the side of my house. He followed, footsteps heavy and relentless. I was running on pure adrenaline, legs burning as I darted through the backyard, the darkness swallowing me whole. I turned a corner, heart hammering in my throat, and realized I was trapped. The fence loomed high behind me. The killer closed in, his sword gleaming in the faint moonlight. My back was against the wall, literally. I was cornered. And then I spotted it. A rock. It wasn't much, but it was something. I hurled my knife at him, a desperate move to buy time, and when he dodged, I scooped up the rock and threw it with all my strength. It hit him square in the chest, knocking him back a step. I didn't think. I tackled him, sending us both crashing to the ground. For a second I thought I had a chance. Then he kicked out, catching me by the ankle as I tried to scramble away. He yanked me down, his blade flashing dangerously close. I kicked blindly, catching him in the face, and somehow I was on my feet again. But he was on his feet too, and there was no time to think, only to act. I spun around, desperate to find an escape route. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. My chest was heaving, sweat and fear mingling in my eyes. The killer stepped forward, almost casually, as if savoring the moment. He swung his blade with terrifying precision, and I barely managed to dodge, feeling the air slice past my face. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. In a desperate move, I lunged at him, trying to push him back, but he was strong, far stronger than I'd imagined. He swatted me aside like I was nothing, and I hit the ground hard. Pain shot up my back, my vision blurring for a moment. But I couldn't give up now. I had to survive. I had to fight. I scrambled to my feet just as he raised his sword for another strike. I braced myself, ready to dodge. But then, a flash of headlights. A car turned the corner, its beams cutting through the darkness like a lifeline. Without thinking, I dashed out into the street, waving my arms frantically. "Help! Please help!" I shouted, voice breaking. The car screeched to a halt, barely missing me. I could see the driver's wide-eyed expression of shock as he rolled down the window. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, but I barely heard him. "Someone's trying to kill me," I blurted out, pointing wildly toward the shadows where the killer lurked. "You have to help me, please." Before I could finish, the killer stepped out of the darkness, calm as ever, the sword hanging loosely at his side. He was watching us, almost amused. The driver's eyes widened in horror. He fumbled with his door handle, stepping out of the car. "Get in, we've got to—" But it was too late. The killer moved like lightning, lunging at the driver with brutal efficiency. I didn't think. I just reacted. I shoved the driver aside, and the blade that was meant for him sliced through the air inches from my face. I stumbled back, barely catching myself. "Get in the car!" I shouted at the driver, but he didn't move. He was frozen, staring at the killer with a mix of terror and disbelief. And then, somehow, he snapped out of it. He charged at the killer, a move that was as brave as it was foolish. The killer sidestepped easily, sending the driver sprawling to the ground. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I scrambled into the driver's car, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. The keys were still in the ignition. I twisted them, the engine roaring to life. My eyes flicked to the side mirror, and I saw the killer looming over the driver, raising his sword for the final blow. "No!" I shouted, jerking the car into reverse. Tires screeched as I floored the gas pedal. The car shot backward, and I felt the sickening thud as I hit something. Someone. The killer's face twisted in pain as he was thrown to the ground. For a heartbeat, everything was still. Then, before he could get up, I shifted into drive and gunned it, the car lurching forward. The killer tried to move, but the front tires caught him square in the chest, crushing him beneath the car's weight. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I drove until I was sure he wasn't getting back up. The car bounced and jolted as I ran over his body again and again, my vision blurred by tears and adrenaline. Finally, I skidded to a stop, hands still clenched around the steering wheel. The silence was deafening. Slowly, I turned off the engine. The driver was sitting up now, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stepped out of the car, legs trembling beneath me, and looked down at what was left of the killer. He lay twisted and broken on the pavement, his sword lying inches from his outstretched hand. I killed him," I whispered, the words feeling hollow and unreal. My mind was spinning, struggling to process what had just happened. The driver stumbled to his feet, his gaze shifting between me and the mangled body. "You saved me," he said hoarsely, voice thick with shock. "You saved us both." I shook my head slowly, still staring down at the killer's lifeless form. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel real. I'd just been trying to survive. But now, as I stood there in the aftermath, a chill crept up my spine. Because in the darkness, behind the fear, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. It's now been a couple of weeks since then. I kind of hate everyone in my neighborhood. It was a cold winter afternoon the day that I died. My parents had taken me out to skate on the lake. I'd begged them all morning and watched in horror as the ice cracked beneath me. My father had tried to save me, but it wasn't meant to be. I don't know what I was expecting. A bright light, pearly gates, but there was nothing. I just stayed, unable to move on. I watched them as they grieved. They struggled as you'd expect. My mother made all the funeral arrangements, but she was completely emotionless. It was like all her light had been snuffed out. All of our family tried to offer condolences, but they slid right off of her with no reaction except the expected words. My father was worse. He became disconsolate. He barely left the house except on days when I'd see him sitting at the lake, staring out at the place where I'd fallen through, and he'd been unable to save me. He shouldn't have blamed himself. I didn't, but he did anyway. I never blamed him or Mom. It wasn't their fault. I just wished I weren't so alone. As you'd expect, with a wife who shut down emotionally and a husband who couldn't stop hating himself, their marriage began to suffer. Friends and family tried to help, but there was nothing they could say. My father returned to work, but was a shell of himself. My mother went through the motions, but began sleeping every night in my room. I wished so much that there was something I could do, but I wasn't really there. My wishes, like my body, were immaterial. They kept drifting further and further apart, living two separate lives in the same house. They tried therapy, but they either couldn't talk or said hateful things that made it worse. I think they both knew they were headed toward divorce. Then the anniversary of my death came. Mom was sitting in her room, silent, when she went into their bedroom, threw her arms around my father, and burst into tears. Surprised, he held her and cried too. It was like all the pain of the past year came out in one burst. After that, they slowly began healing their relationship. She moved back into the bedroom, and they began spending time together, going out on date nights and reconnecting. Soon they were pregnant with another child. The pregnancy went smoothly, and they were soon blessed with a baby girl, Grace. They pampered her and watched her like a hawk, thanking God every day for their second chance. Then one night they walked into her room and found her passed away. SIDS, the doctor said. There was nothing they could have done. It's hard watching them go through it again. I pray they'll make it. But I had no choice. I can't take being alone anymore, and I've always wanted a sister. Everything was completely normal until last year. We had what felt like a totally typical marriage. I remember the night things started to get weird because it was right after our 5th wedding anniversary. It was a regular day working at the bank when I got a text from my wife. A text from her in the middle of the day was not unusual, but what the text said was definitely not like my wife. "Hey babe, I had an idea for something new we could try when you get home." Now, don't get me wrong, I was thrilled to get this text in the middle of my workday. I think any man would be ecstatic at a text like that, but I was having a hard time getting too excited because something about it felt so off. My wife has never been the kind of woman to send a message like this, let alone want to try something new. She is a very shy and to herself woman. The day moved at a snail's pace as I anticipated what my wife had in store for me. I tried not to overhype it in my head. I prepared myself to find a baked good or something when I walked into the house. I fully believed she didn't mean to send a winky face. Not to say I would have been disappointed with whatever she had in store. I'm not much of a wild guy myself, but a little spice never hurt anyone, right? When I pulled into the driveway, I was surprised to see most of the house lights were off. I suspiciously unlocked the front door to see my beautiful wife standing facing away from me in the doorway to the bedroom. My happiness from seeing her quickly grew into confusion when she didn't turn around to look at me when I walked in and said her name. She would normally run up to me and give me a big hug. In the past, my wife has always been the sweetest person I've ever known. For her to not run up and give me a hug and a kiss was strange. I made my way inside after waiting a second, trying to be as loud as possible in the hope she would suddenly notice I was home and look at me. I got closer and noticed she wasn't moving other than her soft breaths. I was standing right behind her and tapped her on the shoulder. "Hey, sweetheart, are you okay?" Right as I got out my words, she jumped around to face me with a giggle and smile. "Ha! That was so funny. Did I scare you?" she said while covering her mouth in an attempt to hide her toothy laugh. "Yeah, I guess you really did scare me," I replied with a nervous chuckle. "So was that your special surprise you talked about?" "Of course not, silly. That was just the beginning of the fun," she remarked with a smirk and a wink. She grabbed my hand and led me into our bedroom. Under normal circumstances, I would have been over the moon about it, but her scaring me just before leading me into the bedroom felt so off-putting. Did she think this would turn me on somehow? Did one of my buddies reach out to her and tell her to do this? All I knew was that I was not interested in whatever romantic endeavors my wife had planned. I never thought I would say that. As we got to the bed, she pulled back all the covers and told me to lie down. I honestly felt like telling her I had a headache or something, but it was clear she had been thinking about this all day, and I really didn't want to discourage my wife from initiating things in the future. My mind was spinning with thoughts of what she might do next, but she did something I didn't expect. She put the covers back over me and tucked me in. I was both relieved and more confused than ever. She gave me a soft smile, then in one fast motion fell to the ground like a sack of wet hammers. I intuitively sat up and leaned over the side of the bed to make sure she was okay, and was only met with the ends of her long brown hair peeking out from the bottom of the bed. "Hey, Catelyn, why are you hiding? Can you please come out? I'm not a fan of this game you are playing," I murmured in a tone trying to not sound freaked out. I was only met with the sound of a muffled giggle. I sat in bed for the next 10 minutes trying to tell her to stop. It went from polite asking to begging, but the laughter didn't stop. After my begging didn't seem to work, I got the courage to get out of bed and look beneath me. As soon as I put my foot down, she grabbed my ankle. "What the hell, Catelyn? This isn't funny. You have fun here. I'm sleeping on the couch." I slammed the bedroom door behind me and curled up on the living room couch. I could still hear her laughing from the joke I seemed to miss. It was so hard to sleep that night. The image of her hair barely peeking out from under the mattress really stuck in my head for some reason. It took a while, but I finally fell asleep. The next morning I was up for work a couple hours before her, so we didn't get the chance to talk. I had to go into the bedroom to get my clothes for work, so I peeked under the bed to check on her. She was sleeping peacefully on her stomach, and I tried not to wake her. It was a long, hard day at work. I wasn't really feeling all that scared anymore, more so worried for my wife. I wasn't sure how I could help. Around 10 a.m. I got a text from her. "Hey Emmett, I'm really sorry about last night. I have a lot of explaining to do once we both get home. Can we talk over some pizza?" I felt so much better after reading those words. It might seem insignificant, but my wife hates pizza, so whenever she is willing to eat it with me, I know she's putting in the effort. It was the end of the day, and I headed home looking forward to some pizza and some time with my hopefully back to normal wife. I walked through the door and was relieved to see my wife setting the table and putting down a pizza box. She heard the door shut and ran to give me a hug and a kiss. I really felt like I had my wife back. "I'm so glad you are home. Sit down, sit down. I got pizza from your favorite place down the road," she said as she pulled a chair out for me to sit down. We were both quiet for a minute or two after we both sat down. I don't think either one of us knew how to start the conversation. Just as I was about to speak up, she started to talk. "So I know last night was weird. I just got really insecure after hearing a few of my co-workers talk about the things they do with their partners, and I was worried you thought I was too boring. I know I can be shy and don't like to do anything crazy, and started to feel guilty for not doing more with you. I wasn't entirely sure how to even go about it or what you would like, so I just went for it. I understand now how I went wrong. I'm sorry, I just don't know how to do this kind of thing," she said as if she had rehearsed it many times in her head. "Why would you ever think I was bored of you? I don't need any of that wild stuff. I married you for a reason. You don't need to try to be something you're not. I love you for who you are," I said as I grabbed her hand. She took a deep breath and looked at me with watery eyes. "I love you too. Thank you for being so understanding. I really want to make it up to you." "That's very kind, but the pizza is enough for me." "No, I'm really serious. I did some more research and found a few good ideas," she said as she put her hand on my thigh. I was so torn at that moment. I was terrified from the night before, but it seemed like she learned from her mistakes. Sure, it was an incredibly strange mistake to think scaring me would get me in the mood, but she is extremely sheltered. That's what I was trying to tell myself. I knew deep down something was still wrong, and I should just say no. But I think many people can understand how your body can go on autopilot in moments like this. At this point, nothing was going to stop me, and I'd give every excuse in the book as to why it was okay to let her do her thing. Just like last time, I was led to our bed. She made me lay down and immediately put my hands over my head into handcuffs and put a blindfold on me. My heart was racing at this point. I was terrified, but human nature was taking over, and it could not be overridden. Right as she put the blindfold on me, she stepped back and I didn't hear her move. I was expecting her to do something to me, but nothing. I laid on the bed, feeling more exposed than I ever felt possible. After a couple of minutes, I heard the floor squeak, and it confirmed that she had been standing right by the bed the whole time. I felt like I could feel her eyes staring at me. It was practically burning a hole in my skin. I heard the light switch flick off. Now I really couldn't see anything. After a few moments of anticipation, I felt her fingertips graze the sheets near my sides. Then by my feet, just barely missing any part of my body. I started to maybe get hope again that I shouldn't be scared. Sure, this wasn't what I had in mind, but she was new to this. I was very wrong. That was the last moment I had hope for my wife. This was teasing. This was torture. I was soon met with the sound of her scraping her fingernails against the walls like a wild animal. She moved around the room, scratching anything she could find, along with a brief giggle here and there. It was like she was silently moving from corner to corner. I would hear her make the awful scraping, then it would stop for a second. Then I would be jump-scared by her doing the same thing in a different spot. It made my skin crawl like I had a million little bugs crawling on the inside of my skin. I wiggled violently, trying to get out of the restraints or to get the blindfold off, but I was trapped. It kept getting worse as the night went on. She kept getting right by my ear. Sometimes she would just breathe, and other times she would let out a giggle. She would run her hands closer and closer to my body, sending me into a cold sweat. I, of course, didn't have a way of telling the time, but I would guess it was about an hour in when I stopped begging her to let me go, and I just started yelling for help. I guess she didn't like that because she put duct tape over my mouth. Shortly after that, I started to hear the scraping sound on the ceiling. Our bedroom has an extremely high ceiling, so I had a hard time imagining how she was doing it. I couldn't believe the situation I was in. It felt like a terrible nightmare. I kept thinking any minute I would wake up next to my gorgeous wife sleeping soundly beside me, but the nightmare lived on. My wrists felt raw and bloodied. My neck was sore from moving it back and forth trying to get the blindfold off. My whole body ached from trying to free myself, but all that paled in comparison to the psychological torture my wife was putting me through. Not being able to see her next move and not knowing how far she was going to go killed me inside. Before I knew it, I was waking up the next day, still tied up and blindfolded like the night before, but I didn't hear my wife around. I didn't let my guard down, however. I knew she could just be waiting for me to relax, then jump out and scare me again. After wiggling my head around for a bit, I finally got the blindfold off. I was honestly scared to open my eyes. I was terrified that my wife would be standing in the corner waiting for me to look at her. Luckily, when I opened my eyes, she was nowhere to be found, but the relief was brief after seeing the aftermath of my bedroom. Nearly every square inch was scratched, even on the 20-foot ceiling above my head. Some of the scratches even had blood in them. As I looked around at my ruined room, I heard my phone buzzing on the bedside table. Either I put it there before getting into bed or my wife put it there. At this point, it didn't matter, but having my phone near me could be a saving grace. I figured it was my boss calling me since it was 10 a.m. and I wasn't at work. I wasn't sure if my wife had any plans of coming back to get me, but maybe if I didn't show up to work, my boss would get worried about me and come looking for me. I soon had the realization that if they called my emergency contact, it would just be my wife, and I wasn't sure how helpful she'd be at this point. I laid down in my bed the rest of the day, miserable as I watched the hours go by. My stomach growling and my arms were sore from them being above my head for the last 24 hours. It was around 9 p.m. when my phone started getting calls like crazy. I remembered I had plans to get dinner with my brother and he was probably worried about me. I'm not the kind of person to just bail. After a couple hours of calling, I heard a few knocks at the door followed by my brother's voice. It was muffled, but I could tell he was worried. I heard keys start to wiggly in the doorway. He had a set of keys in case I lost my pair and needed to get in the house. He opened the door and yelled out my name as I tried to be as loud as possible, thrashing my body around as I tried to scream out the duct tape that was nearly off my face. "Emmett? What the hell, dude?" My brother yelled and he ran to my aid. He immediately ripped the duct tape off my face. "Oh my gosh, thank goodness you are here. Get me out now." "Damn, dude. I didn't think you and Catelyn were down bad like that." "Nice," my brother said with a smirk. "Daniel, this is not the time. Get me out," I said with more aggression. Okay, hang on," he murmured as he tried to get the cuffs off. After trying for a while, we found it impossible to get them off without a key. He ended up just getting my bolt cutters and cut them off. It was nearly midnight when I was finally out. My arms were so sore it took me forever just to get them back down at my sides. "So, do you want me to pretend I didn't see any of this or something?" Daniel said in a casual tone. "What? No, it's not what it looks like. Trust me, I wish it was what it looks like. Catelyn is sick or something. She trapped me here all night and practically tortured me. Look, I know we are close and all, but I don't think I need those kinds of details from my own brother," he remarked with a chuckle. "You aren't listening to me. Look at the walls and the ceiling. She did this. She is scaring me. I don't know what to do." He looked around the room and then at the ripped-apart ceiling, not fully grasping the situation but clearly concerned. "Okay, come stay with me tonight if you are freaked out," he said, half annoyed and half worried. I grabbed a few pairs of clothes out of the closet and shoved them in a bag. I wasn't sure how long I was going to be gone, but I wanted to be prepared. My brother only lives a few minutes down the road, so it was an easy drive. The whole time I was worried my wife was going to appear and scare me. We made it inside my brother's house and he apologized for not having a guest bed. He's in his early 20s and lives alone, so he doesn't have much space, but honestly, I didn't want to be far away from him. I didn't dare to tell my little brother I needed him and I was scared, but I think he could tell I wasn't okay. "Listen, I don't really get what is going on, but it's getting really late and we both should sleep. Let me know if you need anything," he said as he awkwardly walked into his room 10 feet away from the couch I was lying on. I had a terrible time falling asleep that night. Whenever I closed my eyes, I just heard the sounds of her nails scraping the walls in my head. I kept thinking, and I felt her warm breath against my ear. I'd open up my eyes to find the room empty. It was starting to feel like the anticipation of her was becoming just as bad as her actually torturing me. I woke up the next morning exhausted. My whole body felt like I was just in a car accident from being so tense for so long, and I only got 3 hours of sleep. I realized that if life was still normal, my wife would make me hot tea and a warm bath with all her fancy essential oils that probably do nothing, but she always puts so much love into it. I started to feel myself slip. I felt sadness creeping in, but none of that mattered. I had to go to work. I couldn't have a no-call, no-show and then call out of work the next day. I would feel terrible about it. Plus, I wanted to apologize to my boss in person. The workday started out strange when I tried to ask forgiveness from my boss, but he acted strange at my apology. He explained that my wife gave him a call and said I wasn't feeling well and I would be absent from work that day. I guess despite everything, my wife still didn't want me to get a slap on the wrist at work. That was only the beginning of the strange day. I found a dead rat in my desk drawer, spiders in my locker, and a huge clump of hair in my lunch. It seemed like I was the only employee being harassed, but they ended up closing and sending everyone home at around 3 p.m. because a few higher-ups got nervous and thought they needed to look into it. Banks tend to take stuff like this seriously. I went out to my car to leave for the day and was in shock to find a note on my car. "Did that do it for you, Catelyn?" I knew it was her. I just didn't want to believe it. The last thing in the world I wanted to do was talk to the woman. I was terrified at this point, but I had to beg her to stop. For some reason, she thought I had some weird kink for being scared, or maybe she developed one. Regardless, I had to tell her if it didn't stop I was going to leave her, or even get a restraining order. I didn't want to meet her in person by myself. I didn't know what stunt she would try and pull to convince me to give her one more chance. Since my brother was already partly up to date on the situation, I asked him if he would be there for our meeting. It might be awkward, but I needed him. I didn't want to involve more people than necessary. I texted them both individually and told them to meet me at a coffee shop that night. It was 7 p.m. and my brother was already sitting next to me waiting for my wife to walk in. As she walked in, it was clear she was putting on an act. She looked overly sad and was dressed in bright clothes that she'd never worn in the past, trying to make herself look innocent. She pulled out a chair and sat down at our table. The air was thick and awkward. "Catelyn, I wanted to meet in person and have Daniel here because I need you to know whatever you are pulling here isn't what I want. I'm not enjoying whatever act you're putting on. I'm not turned on. I don't find it sexy. Whatever you want to call it, please stop. If this is something you are into, I think we need to talk to a professional, because it's scaring me," I said earnestly as her eyes got watery and Daniel slouched in his chair uncomfortably. I don't know what to say, babe. I have to say I'm confused. I know I'm new to this experimenting thing, but I'm doing my best. This is what you asked of me. I'm just trying to be a good wife. You know me. I'm as vanilla as they come. You are the one who asked me about these acts. I'm just doing my best." She stressed as she fought back tears. Daniel looked at me with confused eyes. "Wait, hang on. What's going on? I didn't think you asked for any of this, Emmett," Daniel said. "I didn't. I swear. I have no idea what she is talking about. I would never ask anything like that from her." I pleaded to my brother. "You are sick, you know that. Why are you doing this to me?" she uttered as she pulled out an envelope and tossed it on the table. Daniel and I looked at each other before he reached for it and opened it up. Inside was a letter that Daniel read out loud. "Dear Catelyn, I love you with all my heart, but I'm afraid I'm getting bored of the same old, same old. I want something more. I am writing this out as I might feel weird saying it face to face, but I've been thinking about it and, well, nothing gives me a high quite like when I am scared, and I mean truly terrified. The adrenaline rush is like nothing else. I think if we employ this into our lives, it would really spice things up. In the everyday and in the bedroom. I hope you understand and don't get put off by this, but I really, really want it. Under no circumstance if I say stop, should you stop. If I tell you I'm too scared, you know you are doing something right. I can't wait to see what you come up with, Emmett." He lowered the note to look at me, only finding shock on my face. "What the hell, dude? Why would you do this to your wife and get me involved? This is so messed up and gross. Don't get me involved in your sick kinks ever again," he said as he threw the note at me and stormed out of the coffee shop. I begged him not to leave, but he didn't even turn around. I sat and stared at my wife, terrified. "What on earth is going on here? You and I both know I didn't write that garbage," I angrily whispered to her. Her face slowly morphed from sad to a satisfied grin. Stop it, I don't like this. Why don't you realize I hate what you are doing?" I cried. "When will you realize everything isn't always about you? Maybe I'm the one who likes it," she said as she lifted her eyebrows. "Stop, you are scaring me," I begged. "Good, then it's working," she said as she pushed her chair back and stood up. She turned around and looked like she was going to leave. Just as she was about to open the door, she stopped. She turned back around and looked at me. She slowly walked back toward me and picked up the note my brother threw. She grinned at me smugly as I trembled in fear. She leaned down to my ear and whispered, "I guess I did a good job imitating your handwriting, huh?" she said as I remained frozen in my seat. I watched as she walked out, got in her car and left, not knowing what to do next. She turned my own brother against me. This wasn't a miscommunication or something. She was doing this on purpose. She was torturing me. But why? It couldn't be just because she was bored of everyday life. Something was wrong. I knew my brother wouldn't want me back at his place. He saw what looked to be proof of me being a nasty scumbag. I wouldn't be able to convince him otherwise. I went to a hotel for the night. I didn't have other options. I didn't want to burden anyone else with this. Plus, I figured she'd just turn them against me too. After what felt like the longest day of my life, I was in my hotel bed trying to relax. I got a text from my boss letting me know they had to close the bank for the next couple of days because they were doing an investigation. I felt some relief from this. At least I didn't have to worry about work for a day or two. I don't remember much of that night, but I do remember the outcome of the early morning. I remember feeling cold and wet. I opened my eyes to see I was in the woods and lying in a very shallow grave. Most of my body was above ground with a small pile of dirt on top of me. I was frozen in fear. The fear of my wife lurking around somewhere. It seemed like she tried to bury me alive but did a half-assed job. I tried looking around at the dark forest to try and get my bearings, but only found more confusion and dread. The cold morning wind whistling around me added to my looming fear, as if it was taunting me, but it didn't scare me nearly as badly as my wife. I looked around for her to try and find her, but only got more and more worried when I didn't see her. I heard the sound of twigs snapping from every side. Eventually, I heard a grinding, clicking sound. It sounded robotic, but also human. Then it turned into a giggle. I never thought the sound of my wife's giggle would haunt me so feverishly. The sound would come from far to the right, then switch to my left, faster than she would have been able to get that far, much like she did in our bedroom a couple nights back. I started to hear footsteps along with the twigs breaking. I swore it didn't sound like she was walking on 2 feet, but on all fours. I tried not to think about it. I told myself my mind was playing tricks on me. I shook my head back and forth in an attempt to shake the visions out of my head. I found the strength in me to get to my feet and to run. I noticed what looked like the right direction to move in, based on the ground being disturbed. Like she dragged me through the dirt to the spot I woke up in. After running for a few minutes, the trail looked familiar. I knew I was close to home. When I would hear the footsteps, I would turn my head to look, only to barely miss her. After what felt like forever, I saw her. She was on all fours, circling me, running like a wild animal, her tongue sticking out of her mouth like a dog. I hardly recognized her. Her circles around me got tighter and tighter. As she got closer to me, she slowed down. Eventually, she got right in front of me and stood up on her 2 legs. I tried to run around her, but before I knew it, she pinned me down. I could barely recognize her up until this point, but something clicked when she got close to me. I looked into her eyes, but I didn't see my wife. I saw something else. I guess I should have guessed sooner, but something was wrong with my wife, because this thing wasn't my wife. "What did you do with her?" I yelled in her face. "You will never find her," she whispered with a hoarse voice, as drolls started to come out of her mouth. She abruptly jumped off of me and scurried back into the woods. The last words she said echoed in my head. "You will never find her." The relief I felt knowing my wife might still be out there. But how was I supposed to find her? I couldn't keep up the running my whole way home, but managed to sprint. I kept thinking she was gone, then I would hear her nearby, taunting me. I got back to our house. I hadn't been there since this all started happening a couple days ago, so I was scared to see what the inside looked like. I knew I couldn't stay for long. I saw her car still in the driveway, so I planned to take it. My car was still at my hotel, but I needed to make it hard for her to get around. I thought I would also look for clues for my real wife while I was there. After I entered the house, I was shocked to see the state it was in. My wife would rather die than see her home look like this. Glass broken on the ground from wine glasses, dirt and trash in random piles, a foul stench filling my nose. I couldn't believe what that thing did to our once beautiful home. The horrible smell distracted me, but I remembered my goal once I saw some blood. I followed it to the basement staircase. I grabbed the fire poker by our fireplace and walked to the door leading to the basement. I felt guilty for taking so long and not just heroically running down the steps to hopefully see my wife. But my whole being was so full of dread I couldn't help but feel fear. I knew I had to fight, but every part of my body wanted to flee. The door creaked as I pushed it open. It was hard to tell if it was louder than normal, or if the moment made it feel excruciating. I peered through the door to see more blood on the stairs. A lot of blood. I ran down as fast as I could without slipping, noticing blood on the guardrails as I tried to grab them. As I made it to the bottom of the steps, I was in shock. I saw my wife. She laid on the cold, unfinished basement floor. Her breath was visible but faint, covered head to toe in cuts and scrapes. I ran to her and collapsed beside her, weeping like a baby. "Catelyn! Catelyn, please get up. Come on. We need to get you out of here. You need help, and I don't want her to find us," I said with a panicked breath. What's going on? Was I sleeping down here? Wow, my head hurts," she whispered in a groggy voice. "No time for that now. I'm getting you some help," I proclaimed as I lifted her up in my arms with a sudden burst of adrenaline. It was clear from her injuries she needed medical attention, but I wasn't worried for her life. There is no way the amount of blood I saw in the house was all from her. If it was all hers, she'd be on the verge of death. That awful creature must have gotten some blood somewhere else to scare me more, as if the sight of my wife on the floor was grisly enough. We rushed to the hospital in what felt like record time. As I carried her in, the hospital staff approached us asking all kinds of questions. I tried my best to explain, but it didn't sound right coming out of my mouth. I couldn't explain any of it because I was still trying to understand it myself. The staff got my wife set up in a hospital bed. She had an IV for some fluids and some stitches here and there. After a couple hours, she seemed to perk up, but she could tell I wasn't being myself just yet. "Babe, I know you are freaked out, but don't be so cold to me. I just went through something awful. Please, I need you now more than ever," my wife said from her bed across the dimly lit room. I was trying to be as loving as possible, but I just couldn't get some images out of my head. I was desperately trying to remember my wife before that monster came into the picture, but it was so hard. Her face went from sad to an over-exaggerated pout, in an attempt to make a sad puppy dog face. She tried to make the cutest faces she could. I got closer and closer to her, and her happiness grew. I ended up sitting on her bed with her. She leaned close to me and puckered her lips. I gave in and had a blissful kiss with my wife, until she bit down. I tried to pull away, but she had such a grip, I could tell I'd badly hurt my lip if I resisted. Instead, we both sat in silence. Her breathing got slow and deep as my heart rate increased. She slowly loosened her bite, but stayed uncomfortably close to my face. "Say a word and I will scream," she whispered. Before I could process what was happening, she reached for my hand and grabbed my pinky. Then she violently forced it the wrong way. I screamed in pain as I heard the snap of my finger breaking. My ears were ringing in shock. As I reacted, my wife did as well. "Get away from me, you horrible monster! Get off of me! Don't you dare touch me!" She yelled at the top of her lungs. I backed away from her. Confused and shocked medical staff ran into our room. "What the hell is happening here?" a tall man said. "Sir, thank goodness you are here. My husband is trying to hurt me. He is the one who gave me these injuries. I didn't want to tell anyone because I was too scared he would hurt me even more. Please help me. Now he is trying to hurt me again," she desperately cried. No, do not believe her. Look at what she did to my lip and my finger. I'm the one who needs help. This woman is torturing me," I said, pleading to the staff as a nurse chimed in. "Those look like wounds of a woman defending herself, buddy. Don't play the victim." "No, please. Someone has to help me. This isn't my wife. This is a monster. She is manipulating you all." I finished my sentence as 2 large security guards came to take me out. As I left the room, I turned back to look at that thing sitting in the hospital bed. It grinded at me. It was still playing a game, still scaring me to my very core. I made it outside with the 2 security guards and they helped me into a cop car. As we drove, I saw my whole life falling apart before my eyes. I realized I was probably going to jail. She would find her way to make me seem guilty of abuse and who knows what else. She would bend the truth. She even had my own brother on her side. Not only did I come to terms with going to jail, but with the fact that my wife was gone. Even if my real wife was still alive, I'd been through so much trauma with that monster that I can never see her the same again. At that moment, my whole world was shattered. I felt emotions inside me bubbling up. I felt sadness, pain, anger, all so strong I didn't know what to do. Just as I fought off my tears, I was jolted out of my depression with the cop car swerving off the road suddenly. Every part of my body tensed up as the car flipped and went into a ditch. I was dizzy, but somehow still lucid. I managed to get my seatbelt unbuckled, but soon found myself in an awkward position just lying in the flipped car waiting for help. The 2 officers in the front seat were passed out. I was pretty sure one of them was dead by looking at him. After lying in the flipped car, weighing my options, I saw someone walking around the car. I yelled for help, but my heart sank when I realized it was her. Suddenly, the car that just moments ago made me feel trapped now felt like my saving grace. The only thing separating me and that monster. I did my best to keep my eye on where she was, but she managed to get around too fast. Before I knew it, she reached through the broken window, grabbed my ankles and ripped me out of the car. I could feel the glass shards ripping at my skin as she forced me out. She got me out and dragged me a couple feet away from the car. She stood above me, straddling me. Her arms were blooded from pulling me out of the car. She got closer to me slowly, eventually sitting on my chest. As she got close, I could see how bad she looked. Her hair was knotted and ratty. Her skin looked dry and weathered. My whole body ached at the sight of her. If this was my wife, something was really wrong. "Wasn't that thrilling?" she remakes with a crazed look in her eye. "Stop it, just stop it. I will leave you and get a restraining order against you. I will do anything in my power to get away from you," I pleaded with her weight on my chest. "Ha! How do you think you'll get away with that? I have everyone on my side. I have written evidence that makes me seem innocent. No one will ever believe you. You are putty in my hands." "Is this what you want? For me to go to jail? To make me look like an abusive, sexually corrupt man? Why are you doing this?" I said with desperation. "Go to jail? Who said I wanted you to go to jail? Who do you think stopped the cop car? The tooth fairy?" she said with a chuckle and twisted smile. "Then why did you tell all those lies about me? Why are you trying to make me look guilty and then the next minute save me? If you go to jail, the chase is over. You will be protected by the jail walls and steel bars that keep us separated. I won't be able to keep scaring you. Jail would be freedom for you, freedom from me. What if I would rather go to jail than have you constantly lurking around every corner?" I said with squinted eyes. She met my gaze and got even closer. She whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. "Go to jail and give up finding your beautiful bride?" "You sick bastard," I said as I tried to sit up to grab her, but she pinned my arms down. "You thought because of the little stunt I pulled I was making up a lie about your wife still being out there? Don't be silly. You know your wife. She would never act like this." "How do I know you aren't bluffing?" I said as my eyes filled with hate. "Think of it this way. Would you rather keep looking for her your whole life, then on your deathbed realize it was all a lie? Or go to jail and realize on your deathbed that your real wife was alive the whole time, trapped away somewhere, desperately waiting for her knight in shining armor to come to save her? But he never came. What a shame that would be, huh?" she uttered with a soft, maniacal tone. "Who are you? Why are you doing this?" I said as she let go of my wrists and sat up and began to speak in a normal, cheering tone. "What do you mean, goofball? I'm your wife. I'm doing it because I love you." I felt even more scared to see her attitude shift so suddenly. I could see what she was trying to do, showing me how she could manipulate me and others. She got off of me and walked a few feet away. "More cops will be here soon. I will keep them off your trail so you have time to get away. But don't get too comfy. Wherever you go, I will find you. Once I find you, keep running. I want you to keep having a sense of getting away from me. I want you to feel safe so I can take that feeling away from you again." I rose to my feet, looking at her in awe. I knew I couldn't be completely confident in my real wife still being alive, but the thought of her in a cold room waiting for me echoed through my head. I had to keep running. I had to keep looking, even if that was exactly what she wanted from me. I started to run. I ran with no clue where I was going. I didn't have a home to go to. Nowhere was safe. I was hopeless. I spent the next several months running away. I hitchhiked and found odd jobs. I even found a super sketchy doctor's office that took some cash I had in my wallet. I had to get some help with the injuries I sustained. A few separate times I thought I was safe. I thought I had outrun the police and, more importantly, my wife. The first time I realized she found me, I opened the door to find bloodied teeth all over my doorstep. I was in the next place for about 6 weeks, but kept getting ding-dong ditches. I thought it was just kids, but no kid would be doing it on the hour every hour for days straight. That brings us to the current day. I won't give details on my location in case she is reading this. However, I'm not completely sure if she has found me or not. Sometimes I hear scraping on the outside of the house, or what sounds like something inside my walls. I tell myself it's just animals because it makes me feel better. She might be trying to be less obvious, so I stopped running. I was relieved at first that she wasn't doing anything too terrifying, but then I realized it's worse to not know if it's her or not. I've been spending most of my time hoping and praying that my real wife is still out there. I can't help look for her as well as I'd like, given I'm very far from home. I worry that if I just sit around and wait, they will never find her, not as long as that thing pretends to be my wife. My biggest fear of all is that she is my real wife. Is she giving me false hope so I have a reason to stay out of jail and a reason to live? No, I can't believe that. I will never give up hope. I love you, Catelyn, and I will keep looking for you. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.